Hello, everybody. I'm very glad we can see others again because today my guest is Roland Lazenby from USA, the writer, creator of the one of the most amazing NBA books I ever read, Michael Jordan Life, sports book of the year in Poland. Hello, Roland. How are you?
Doing well, Jacob. Thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, I'm very glad that we can finally meet and see each other. I remember that I sent you questions to the interview 3 years ago. That's a lot of time.
Right. Yes.
uh,
Time has traveled swiftly.
yeah, that's true. And I must ask you about something because I remember you sent me the answer that you're thinking about retiring from writing. So I must ask you, we can wait for a new book or this retiring is a true deal?
It was mostly burnout. I had worked, the Jordan book was so difficult. There was so much to do. And then I had to do the Kobe book in a year. And I literally just worked around the clock in a year. And my sister died the day I finished it. I hadn't seen anyone. I the the editing of the book and proved to be disastrous, and suddenly I had to go back in under difficult circumstances and really try to salvage the book. And I was very angry over my sister's death and just completely and thoroughly burned out. Never been burned out before getting into the Jordan and then the Kobe book. And of course, they both came right after my Jerry West biography. So I am back now working on a biography of Magic Johnson.
Whoa, that's great to hear that.
Yes. And in fact, I'm in a room with research everywhere. And I got up from listening to interviews I did back in 1990
Whoa.
with the Lakers and 89, interviews with Pat Riley, interviews with Magic, interviews with all the particulars. It's funny. I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews, and we have all these cassette tapes, and we're now digitizing them. And often I would do these wonderful interviews, and I would be on such a deadline that I would never even get to listen to some of them. And now I'm going back, and there are interviews there I had no idea that I have. And they are very special. And so it's really time traveling for me. You talk about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
30 years ago is 31 years ago is really amazing.
It was a different world, different NBA, and I think that this is something amazing when you talk about this because you can see how much things are changing through these years, and so I must ask you about. It will be it is harder to write about magic than write about Kobe or Michael or Jerry West.
Um, no, I think each person presents a different challenge. Each life is very different. Um, each player as a competitor is very different. Even two guys like Kobe and Michael, who played for the same coaches in the same offense, their lives were very different. And the same's true with Magic. Um, I'm having lots of fun doing it. I'm 67 years old. And these books require so much energy I just have so much information. And I'd forgotten how it weighs on you like a mountain. and the pressure. If I keep saying this, I'll talk myself out of this. But it's really hard to explain how much work these books require.
Uh,
And it really affects my health.
I understand that because I read your book about Michael, about Kobe, and I must say it was different to read your books than reading autobiography of today NBA players or others biography books about not only NBA players or any sportsmen, because you create all story from the beginning. We can read about the childhood, about family, about younger years. So I understand how much work you need to do to create all of this. And I do some research. I know that you travel a lot to find information, to make interviews. Can you tell me what was most difficult time in writing a book about Kobe and Michael?
Well, the research is the fun part about it. I think for a nonfiction writer, at least for me, a lot of what drives the process is my emotional relationship with the research, with the interviews I do, with the things I find. You're taking all this information about a person and putting it on a timeline. And sometimes, we have this tradition in America, in sports coverage in general, where we really just mostly talk about athletes and their sports. How did they shoot the basketball? How did they kick the football? Or, what was the score of this game? But when you take that record of their athletic performance, their competition, and you add a track of their personal lives, all the things going on, I'm always amazed by what they're able to do despite great personal difficulty. And I also am always amazed by the people who influence them. And family stories are powerful things. And also, these American basketball players have become big cultural figures, these top players. My Michael Jordan book's in 16, 17 languages now. An Estonian publisher just bought it. And so, the Polish publisher moved in early and was one of the driving forces in the international thing. It's
I can show again this book because it's just like I said, one of the most amazing books I read. Really, it's not because I'm talking with you, but I think that it's a great book. And I remember when SQN Publishing put information that this book will be in Poland, I was feeling that it could be something amazing, and it really was. And I know that there is a lot of people in Poland that want to thank you because you give them two amazing stories. We have two books in Poland from you about Michael Jordan and of course Kobe Bryant, and I must ask you when you can visit us, because a lot of people are asking about this, when we can meet Roland Lazenby in Poland, of course, after all this crazy stuff with pandemic.
Well, there were a couple of times where I almost got to Poland. I haven't traveled a lot in Europe. I went to Italy for research on my Kobe book.
Yeah.
I went to London because I was a finalist for Biography of the Year in the Cross British Sports Book Awards. They had a televised thing. And I almost arranged to get to Poland that week.
Oh.
And this was in 2017. However, I needed knee replacement surgery. I've done that now, so it's much easier for me to travel. Unfortunately, we have this little issue called COVID-19.
Yeah.
And that has us sheltering in place in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, where we live. But I hope that the day is soon that we have a vaccine and that I can get to Poland. I don't understand the Polish language, but I will turn on the audio version of Michael Jordan Alive and just listen.
Oh, that's great.
Because it is so beautiful. And there were many things I didn't know about Poland when this process started. I had no idea it was 80 million people. And I think I'm remembering correctly there. It's a large country in terms of population. It's a large
38 million people is living in.
Yeah. Okay, I apologize. I tend to overestimate. And when I get lost in research, my whole mind was on nothing but Magic Johnson.
I understand that.
And then sadly, terribly, Kobe died. And my life was caught up in a whirlwind of, and it's not that I'm a real important person, but I'm someone people can get a hold of to talk to. A lot of times they can't get a hold of other people. And because I'm a biographer, I look at the lives of a person, and it's really, biography is really, these are important international figures, as I was saying. And we tend to think of big biographies being about presidents or world leaders, important figures in other ways. And so what I'm doing, sometimes we have big biographies, for example, of baseball players from the past, when baseball was very big in America, with Babe Ruth, or we might have a boxer from the past, when boxing was very big in America. But basketball was never a very big thing. Then Michael Jordan and the NBA found the ticket to making it a big thing around the globe. And so now these books, it's like we're writing about global leaders. And in some ways, they're only basketball players. But in other ways, they set the agenda on all kinds of things. And they are, on one hand, heroes. And on another hand, they are fashion and merchandising figures and popular culture figures that are opinion leaders. And so their stories are big and important. Michael Jordan's one of the best known people on the planet.
Yeah, that's true.
There are presidents that we couldn't sit here and name. You may be able to, but I couldn't name the presidents of 10 or 12 countries.
I'm not good at that, so I probably do not, but I understand you.
And so that's why I decided to begin treating them as such, to look at everything that I could find in their lives, to look at their character, at the tremendous character of their families, and to understand, particularly because these men are great competitors, to understand their competitive nature, their psychology, and to really try to gain a sense of why they are who they are.
Yeah, you bring us a portrait of heroes, real heroes, because when we saw all Michael Jordan career, how what he bring to the game is amazing, because it was 80s. The NBA was popular, of course, but only in the USA, because here in Poland we don't have chance to watch the NBA. We sometimes have VHS cassettes to watch them, but we don't have any chance in TV watching this in TV. And for a lot of people in Poland, Michael Jordan was like a god, some kind of Zeus, and NBA was our Olymp, because we didn't have chance to see every day how he was playing, and he changed a lot in mentality of basketball fans, I think, because he showed us how much you can win when you are fighting for this. And I must ask you, you think that Michael Jordan was the first player to have this amazing mentality, the mentality which is today calling the Mamba mentality because of Kobe Bryant?
No, actually, I think there are a number of those. Jerry Sloan just died.
Yeah.
He is known around the world as the coach of the Utah Jazz. But before, he was Mr. Chicago Bull before Michael Jordan ever was. And Jerry Sloan had such a intense competitive attitude. The old Chicago Stadium would be roaring. And this was basketball that always struggled in Chicago. But it would be roaring over the competitive nature of Jerry Sloan and Norm Van Leer. Now, there are some fine competitors. But, you know, the NBA, David Stern became commissioner of the NBA the year Michael was drafted. And he soon came up with a strategy of making games available around the globe at a much cheaper rate. And I remember sitting and talking with an international journalist from Romania. And this was in 92 at the All-Star game. And he had just come over, and you mentioned cassettes. He had talked about having to smuggle cassettes around in the 80s to see NBA players. It was not something that was approved. But with the fall of the Iron Curtain, so many things began to change. And the All-Star game in 1992 in Orlando was this huge celebration. Disneyland, marching band, or Disney World, I believe, marching bands and mountains of seafood and champagne on I've never seen such an extravagant party as the 92 All-Star game. And I was riding with this journalist, Bogdan Stankulescu, I believe his name was. And we were sitting on the bus together, riding over to the media party. And he looked at me and he said, "What will men think of next?" But what had happened is, once Europe opened up, the NBA began making games available in European countries in a very cheap manner. And sometimes, for example, in Romania, they couldn't afford to shoot and produce local soccer games, but they could take an NBA game and put it on. And it just so happened that here was Michael Jordan. He was the first to be seen by the world. Now, he was incredible. He had the flight of Dr. J. Not many people saw Dr. J in the early days when he was so great. He had the flight of Dr. J, but he had the competitive attitude, the drive, the ferocity of, gosh, I don't know. I'm not sure there's ever been anyone that's ever had. Maybe Napoleon. I don't know.
I don't
Some
know.
in general, he, some conqueror,
It was
Attila
one of
the
a
Hun.
kind.
He had the competitive attitude of Attila the Hun. We'll settle on that.
Yeah.
Pick any of those great warriors of mythology and legend and history, and he was a basketball player, but he could have been an unbelievable warrior. He really could have, if you think about it.
I think so. Yeah.
And that ability to fly, and then this is a warrior who could fly. And I didn't want to write about him as a hero. I did not want to engage in mythologizing and making him bigger than life. That was already going on with all the Gatorade ads and Nike and
Like Mike, yeah.
and all the hype of a basketball game, all the staging of the NBA games and the thing, oh, this is so important, and taking a mere basketball game and having people all over the world thinking, oh, this is critical. And 6 months later, many of them can't even remember the game or the score but that's how sports does it. And
Yeah.
Jordan was the perfect figure for that. And so I wanted to have an examination of him as a man. And so my book was aimed at telling all of the stories, the kinds of things they started to show in The Last Dance a little bit.
Okay, you tell us about Last Dance, so I must ask you this question. How many times you heard the question, Roland, what do you think about The Last Dance?
I have very mixed emotions. First, I know how hard it is to tell that story. And I can't imagine having to tell a story that Jordan has to approve. And so I think Jason Hare, the director, did a fabulous job. Of course, it's a big production. They have all the money. They have all the cooperation they need. And Jason has those resources, so he brings all that to it. But he has to get Michael Jordan on board to sort of confirm negative things about himself. And so from that standpoint, I thought it was very good. There are other things. In fact, it was brilliant. But there are other things that trouble me, and I don't know how you could deal with all these stories. For example, Ron Harper. You had several Bulls players who were so important to those teams. Ron Harper was really important, and
yeah.
They didn't give him any time. George Mumford, the psychologist and mindfulness expert, really important. Sonny Vaccaro, who drove Nike. I mean, there is no question Sonny Vaccaro drove Nike to invest in a big way in Michael Jordan. But Nike, is redoing history. And so they did 2 hours of interviews with Sonny Vaccaro, but didn't air a second of it. The same with George Mumford, and I'm sure with Ron Harper too. And there are other people. They aired a good bit from Tony Kukoc. But Luke Longley didn't want to be interviewed. There were always key figures there who did important things. I thought they did a nice job with Pippen and Steve Kerr. Those stories and the backstories were good.
The backstory of Steve Kerr is one of the most amazing we can watch in this document.
And he was so wonderful to me. I did a book. I was there for the Last Dance season doing a book called Blood on the Horns. And I believe my Polish publisher has decided to publish that book. It was published in 1998, right after the season. And I was there interviewing everybody. Tex Winter, the Triangle assistant coach of the Bulls, was my friend, and he was guiding me along to get all the inside information. That book sold a lot of hardcover copies, but the publisher was small and went bankrupt. And thus it never came out in paperback. And so I'm pretty sure the rights to that have been published for a Polish audience. And so I was there doing that, and I witnessed a lot of things that were not in The Last Dance. But, you know, Michael was the star of the show. And he waited 20 some years to allow this footage to be released. And as the star of the show, he has the right to tell his own story. And I think it's interesting as his own story, pushed by a good director. How did you feel about the series? Excuse me.
No problem. I think that, first of all, from a technical stand, this is something amazing because producer, all group of people who was working on that make amazing job. I love movies. I'm watching a lot of movies, and everything in The Last Dance was amazing. Starting from great music, they bring everything what is necessary to create that feeling that we can watch something big, something amazing. And every time I was starting to watching another and another episode, I didn't skip the intro. Every time I'm watching some movies or TV series on Netflix, I'm just skipping the intro. Right, I can saw that one time. I don't need to see this another time. But in The Last Dance, damn, I need to watch this from the first second to the last. And about all story about that Michael Jordan is the main star. For me, I was learning the basketball from watching Michael Jordan. And it's amazing because today almost everyone have social media. And we're talking about not only present players and not players from 90s, but Magic Johnson have Twitter, Instagram. A lot of players have it, but Michael Jordan never have anything. No Facebook fan page, no Instagram, no Twitter. And when I saw MJ sitting in his chair with a cigar and whiskey, I was crying. For me, it was, whoa, he is really there. He's sitting, he's smoke his cigar, drinking the best Scotch whiskey, and for me it was something amazing.
Right, it's true. And have him looking at that pad, looking at the other interviews, and reacting. It was all priceless. No, I agree, and I thought so. I just there are a few things I missed from it, but the main thing it accomplishes, which is what it set out to do, to show the mental ferocity, the bullying, the driving of his teammates. It wasn't about him jumping high. I mean, it was, but it wasn't about him jumping high and making baskets. It was about him terrifying those around him and driving them. And if they couldn't be driven, then they would be driven off. They wouldn't be on the team. And that was such a factor. Everyone thinks Phil is a great coach, and he is, and Krause is a great general manager, and he was. But it was really all about Michael Jordan. He drove, you know, they are looking for ways to modify him, put brakes on him, calm him down, and keep him from devouring his teammates. That's why they brought in George Mumford to try to when I first started talking to Phil years ago, I said, Phil, what's it like with this guy MJ? He said, it's so powerful to go into an arena and watch him play the way he's going to play. And he's going to do everything within his power to get us a victory. And that is such a feeling to walk out of that building with one of those victories. But it's the days between games where he's so difficult, where he can't flip the switch and cut off that great competitiveness. He's going to grind you up every place. And it is very hard. It's very hard to be around him, is what Phil was telling me, because of just how abrasive and brusque and challenging and intimidating was his personality.
We think about Phil Jackson like about great coach, but for me, of course, Phil Jackson was one of the greatest coaches in NBA history. But the most important thing is that he is a great psychologist. He took a lot of different mentalities, because we have Michaelu Jordanie, who was the biggest. He always wanted to show he can win, and he do everything to win. We have Scottie Pippen, the great player, amazing player, but his mentality wasn't the same like Jordan. He had his trouble. He was from the little city, and we can saw that in this document that Scottie was he was different than MJ. We have Dennis Rodman, the craziest man alive. I think that someday we will have information that Dennis is from space, really, because he's amazing.
You know, I was listening back to those 30-year-old tapes. I used to do a lot of work with the Pistons, and I would have conversations with Dennis. And Dennis was always a different guy, but this was before he went crazy in the NBA. He was just a hardworking guy from the country, studying a lot of tapes. So it was very different to hear his voice in 1990 than it was in 1996 when he was with the Bulls. Anyway, I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, that was amazing change. But returning to Phil Jackson, he took every one of them. He took MJ, Scottie, BJ Armstrong, Horace Grant, a lot of players with different mindset, and create the one and only Chicago Bulls dynasty. That was most epic for me, because it's very hard to do this.
Right, where Phil so impressed Michael. Michael played for the great Dean Smith at the University of North Carolina, great coach, who was always, basketball coaches are known for being excitable, jumping up and raving and moving all around. And Dean Smith was not that. He was calm on the sidelines. And in Chicago, Doug Collins, Michael's coach, as the team got better, was a maniac. He would be soaked in sweat. He would be all over the place. He might be almost in a fight with somebody from the other team. He'd been a competitor of the first order, Doug Collins had, and he was a show himself on the sideline. And what Michael Jordan liked about Phil is that he was so calm. Things were at a pitch level on the floor anyway. But with Phil, when there was a timeout, when there were things to be considered, a lot of people think Phil has always got filled with all this wisdom. But a lot of times it was what he didn't say. He just wouldn't often talk too much. He would say one or two things, an observation, or he's a different approach as a coach, no doubt.
Yeah, for me it is amazing, and I want to talk to you about Kobe, because we all miss him. We all have hard time when we get the information. I remember that day, and I didn't know about this in the hour after that. I just have dinner with my family, and it was evening, and my friend was writing to me, "Do you heard about Kobe? What happened? He will back to NBA? No, he's dead." And I was scared in that moment. I remember I was talking with a lot of friends, a lot of NBA fans, and we never met Kobe Bryant. I didn't see his game on live, and but I just felt like I was I didn't knew what to feel, because in one moment I was thinking he was bigger than NBA player, bigger than game. And I want to ask you how hard it was for you, and
Well,
if it's still
I,
hard.
I I got to know Kobe from the night he scored his first NBA field goal. And I spent a lot of time with him. Kobe gave me great access. I could call him in his hotel room. We would visit in the locker room. I'd call him at home occasionally. I didn't bug him at home too much. But we talked about everything. He was miserable as a young NBA player. It was not what he wanted to do. It was what his parents needed the money. And I liked Kobe. He was just a young kid then, very cocky, but he worked so hard and he was unafraid. He was unafraid of trying to be great. And most people can't do that. Very rare for people to really declare they're going to be great. And he could do that. And so I was with him through the first 7 years. And when he got charged with rape, he's always cycled in and out of media friends, but he changed totally. He became Black Mamba. He changed his number. He did a remake of his life. He had thrown his parents out of his life. He had chased Shaquille O'Neal away, essentially, Phil Jackson away. He had wrecked his life, and he had to go about rebuilding it, and he didn't know how to do that, and he made a mess of rebuilding it. But then Phil Jackson came back, and Phil had been a big part of messing it up. Tex Winter had guided Kobe. And so I would see him occasionally and visit with him. In an NBA locker room, I'd do an interview, or in, wherever they were. And I would, see him at big events, the finals or whatever. But that day, it was a Sunday, and it was about noon here. That morning, I don't go back and read my books too much. I've usually been too busy, too burned out. For some reason, that morning, I picked up my book on Kobe and started reading it. And I read about 30 pages of it. And it wasn't 15 minutes after I put it down that the phone rang. And I got the news. And then the phone rang again 3 minutes later. And it was the BBC. And I ended up, and it's not because, again, I want to stress, it's not that I'm anyone important, but I'm someone they could get to that day. And I ended up doing 43 interviews in 26 hours.
A lot of.
And media interviews are exhausting. I did 6 of them Thursday, and they're so hard. I've got another big one here in about, not long after this one that we're doing. And I was just so exhausted. And those interviews continued throughout that week. on a personal level, my father-in-law was dying. And so it was a very difficult time. And I had been working on my book. And it was just like any thought for my book. I couldn't do it. I had too much to do. And then I started to get settled back in. It takes tremendous focus to write a book like a biography where you've got every detail of their lives you can find there in your notes, in your head, and all the recordings. You know, you've done hundreds of hours of interviews and spent many moments talking with people from the subject's life. And so I had to get back into the world of Magic Johnson and sort of live in that world to write about it. And then here comes Last Dance. And thank goodness it's only been a documentary looking back at a different time, a different era, at the amazing life of MJ. But, and while I didn't have to do 46 interviews in 23 hours, I've had to do literally dozens and dozens. We're sequestered here. My wife helps me a lot. She's retired from her career as an educator. And she helps me manage and deal with and organize all the research I have. And she has to constantly listen to these interviews I have to do. And it has driven her to distraction but I'm very fortunate. Don't get me wrong. I'm just explaining. I'm very lucky to be able to write and to have had the career I've had, to travel and interview these top figures. And now I'm very fortunate to be able to listen to all these tapes that I recorded years ago. Many of them I never listened to after I did the recording. I am astounded by the things I have, the interviews I've done that I had forgotten. It is exciting. It's like rediscovering a portion of my life.
That's really, really amazing. And I hope that we can read this book in Poland. I hope so.
Oh, it is already under license for Poland.
All right, that's a great news. So we will wait for this book. I want to ask you about one more thing, because I know that you don't have so much time, and I really thank you for this time.
I thank you for your time and taking the time to interview me. Thank you.
I must ask you, when you listen these records, these interviews from the past, how much you change through this all years? Sorry.
I've taught interviewing I taught college journalism, and really I was teaching interviewing. And in some ways, I'm the best interviewer in the world. I really am in a search for high quality information. And then in other ways, I'm the absolute worst interviewer in the world. And so it can be maddening to listen to me. I love listening to Pat Riley when he was coaching the Lakers, or Magic Johnson, or Jerry Krause before the Bulls won their first championship. I just found an interview I did with him right when they were getting ready to win their first championship, and it was amazing. Whenever I can remember to ask the question and to shut up, and you're very good at this. You ask the question and then let me talk.
Thank you.
But for years I would get too excited. And my wife, as she helps me transcribe tape, she's going, "Oh no, this is tough. Shut up. Let the people talk." Because I often just start thinking of it as a conversation instead of an interview where I'm trying to get their answer on tape. You know, and so much of it started from standing around in basketball arenas where there are 100 balls being dribbled and sneakers squeaking on the floor. It's hard sometimes to do that. But anyway, it was a very conversational approach. But despite the pain of my stupidity sometimes as an interviewer, there are other times where I just have asked, I have done all the research, I know the subject, and I ask a perfect question. And the person there gives me a perfect answer, one that I've never heard before. And when I talked earlier about the emotional relationship between the writer and the research, it's what keeps me going. It's the thing that I love in all of this process.
I know that feeling. It's something amazing when you give this one question and it's a great question, and you get the feedback, you get this answer, and you see the smile on the face of the man you are interviewing. You see his looking at you.
There, it was great.
Yeah, and you looking at him, and you see in his eyes, all right, that guy want me to talk something important. I give him my time and my knowledge, my everything, and in journalist life, these moments are for me the greatest. The moment you ask the question and you see the smile on the face, that look in the eye, and you know, all right, oof, it's good. I'm not a total idiot, and I don't waste any time.
Far from it. Have you ever fished much?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yeah, in a river or a creek.
Yeah.
Well, I always equate it to that feeling I get when I'm fishing, and I get that hit on the line. When someone really enjoys a question. I remember I worked really hard the first time I had to interview Phil Jackson. And I asked him a question that just brought him up out of his seat with enthusiasm. I was supposed to get 10 minutes with him, and I got 2 hours. And I mean, I ran 2 hours of tape with him.
Amazing.
So you have those questions like that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, Jake.
And thank you very much for that, because it's a real honor to me, because I love your books. I love your work, really. It's not to be sweet, nothing like that, but I really like your work. And I'm very glad you are working again on a new book, because I was afraid that you will retire from writing, and I was thinking, no, one more book, please. So I'm very happy that we can have
I actually have a 2-book deal, but my wife, she did not want me to work again, and so we're trying to get through this one book and get it finished. And so very soon, I'm probably going to give one other interview today, or I know one other today. And then I've done dozens and dozens, and I'm going to stop just so I can focus entirely.
I will wait for this Magic Johnson biography. I hope we can meet in Poland after the pandemic.
Yes, I would like that very much.
I hope we can do this. So thank you very much for this talk. It was really great to hear you. I wish you everything best, and see you in Poland. I hope so.
Yes, I hope so too. And thank you for a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Roland.